We have some information about the newest edition of MLA to come out, the 8th edition. So some of what we're going to be talking about today is, first real quick, we're just going to talk about why they even decided to update that 7th edition and some of those major changes. We're going to be taking a look at different examples of citations between the 7th and the 8th edition so you can really see what has changed. And then we're also going to be talking about kind of best practices if you plan on using, you're assigning the 8th edition to your students this semester. And then finally some of the things that we have done to prepare in the library for the unrolling of this new 8th edition. So we have had the guide since this summer, and we've been kind of immersing ourselves in it. And one of the big overarching changes is that this new 8th edition of MLA really emphasizes its goal is to enable readers to, quote, participate fully in the conversations between writers and their sources. And I really loved this quote because it calls to mind the guiding document that we use as librarians to teach information literacy skills. That document is called the Framework, and it's sort of arranged around 6 big ideas. And one of those big ideas is scholarship is a conversation. So ideas build on top of other ideas, and this really gets into the idea that students are scholars as well, and they're engaging in these conversations. And part of being engaged and participating in these conversations is giving credit and being responsible scholars. So this sort of underpins that new edition. So the 7th edition was published, there was an update to the 7th edition published in 2009, and there has been a lot that has changed over the last 7 years. Namely, this kind of explosion of digital content and sort of matching up of different sources has led to so many new source formats that MLA said, look, we can't keep making new rules for how to cite things like a tweet or a video blog or these weird sources like that. So we're just, instead of making new rules, we're going to come out with a new edition. So really the big overarching change in this new edition is that the way the 7th edition handbook was organized, it was organized by source format, right? You would figure out, okay, what is the source that I'm citing? You would look through the handbook for the match to that type of source, and then you follow those rules. Well, now that there's just so many different types of sources, and it's hard to know, what a source is. So, think, for example, about a song on an album that gets digitized and then uploaded to YouTube. If I want to cite that, well, what am I citing? Am I citing the song? Am I citing the YouTube video? How do we do that? So instead of focusing on what kind of source it is, this new edition is wanting students to ask, what are the core elements of this source? What are the characteristics that almost all sources will have? And as we figure out what the core elements of the source are, we build the citation from there.
Okay, so on your yellow handout, which is also on our library webpage, and in the library itself, we have given examples of what the core elements are or could be. So this is a little bit of an adaptation of what MLA provides in their book. This is what they give you, but we actually explain what these things can be. So we give examples of these, and also they give you what kind of punctuation goes after each of these elements. So it's, in some ways, it's similar to what they had in MLA 7th, but in many ways it's not. So we have examples of what is a container, and I don't know if you mentioned containers yet. I have not. Okay, so containers, well, you mentioned like the video that's online, it's a record, things like that. So like a book could be a container if you were citing a chapter in the book. A web page could be on a container, which is the website. So another container could be a database that you found an article. So it's a holder for a lot of these things that you might end up citing. And Jane had located this article on Pokemon Go, because we had many people on campus this summer doing Pokemon Go. And in the New York Times, they actually give you all the pieces that you need to cite it. And one of the nice things is that they give you a shortened URL. So the big change with MLA8 is that you now need to include internet addresses or URLs, or you may use something that's called a DOI. This was very big in research journals and still is. So it's a shortened version of a URL that starts with DOI, which stands for Digital Object Identifier. Actually, the New York Times will give you a shortened version of its internet address or URL under its tools section on its actual web page, and you can, I think, right-click it and get the shortened URL so you don't have this multi-character, 100-something character long URL for your page.
It's actually in their sharing settings that you can find that, and that's permalink.
Yeah, so there is a permalink for this particular article that's online at the New York Times. You'll notice that there's something missing from this internet address when you cite it. And I don't know if you recognize what that was when you saw it up here earlier. What is missing from this URL? http:// which is usually at the beginning of any sort of internet address, or many internet addresses, sometimes HTTPS. But MLA does not want you to include that HTTPS or http:// They cut it off and they just start with what comes after that. So that's what you would cite in your MLA8 citation.
And so that's what that finished citation would look like after building it in the worksheet. Now, some sources are going to have more than one container, right? So if you think about, okay, here's the source itself, and the container is where you can find that source. But some sources might have more than one container. So let's take the example of a magazine article. Its first container is the magazine. But let's say we find that magazine article through one of our library's databases. Well, the second container then is the name of the database, because we want our reader to know how we got to that source. And so we need to fill out that information as well. So if you have a source where it looks like there's more than one container, what we're going to do is fill out that part for the first source, and then we're just going to fill out lines 3 through 9 again with information about the second container. So here is a Time Magazine article. You can see we've filled in the author, the title of the source. The title of the first container is the magazine, it's Time. And the only other information that I have is the date and the location. And so for this first container, the location of the source is actually where in the container it's going to be found, and so those are our page numbers. And then I can fill out sort of the lines 3 through 9 again for my second container layer, and all that's going to consist of is the name of my database. It was Academic Search Complete in this case. And the location of that article in the second container is going to be that URL. Now in this case, the databases also have a permalink feature, which is where I got this from the tools menu. So in other words, we don't want to be using the URL that's in the address bar at the top of the browser. We want to look and see if there's actually some sort of a permalink stable URL, sometimes it's called as well. And so we just put that together using the punctuation that's on the worksheet, and here is our finished citation for that magazine article from a database, right? So you can see it's going to be a lot longer than they used to be. Yes? Question?
Yeah. Before we started omitting the URL, there was at one point you would start it so that the line doesn't run too short, and then you can
Oh, so where you split it up so it doesn't have that big
just
space?
immediately after hitting search complete, where you add a little space and then it just kind of
Yeah, and
without breaking the link.
it's interesting because some styles have rules about that. So for example, in APA, you can only break it like when there's a slash, for example. I'm not sure, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, but I'm not sure that if MLA had rules about where to break it or not.
Yes, I looked on their examples, and it's usually like after some sort of punctuation. I believe APA's like break swing.
Yeah, something like that.
So you end up sort of breaking it in a place like you might put, up to the question mark up at the first line and then break it for the next line, you start a new URL. So usually you break it in sort of a logical place because I did not see that MLA gave you rules on.
Yeah, but you can still break it.
Yes, yes.
Because, the other thing that MLA says too, you'll notice that in this finished citation, the link is not activated. So because the link is not actually activated, it's not acting as a hyperlink, it doesn't really matter if we break it or not. So. Well, no, right, exactly. I mean, it doesn't matter to the functionality of the link. So certainly, yes, if you want to instruct your students to break it so it fits a little nicer, then that is absolutely your prerogative for sure.
So you still double space, you still indent the second and subsequent lines. So that's the same as MLA says.
Yeah, the format has not really changed. So we have some examples of 7th versus 8th edition, and a couple of these you actually have on the back of your container worksheet. So above the line is a 7th edition citation for a journal article from one of our databases, and below the line is that same citation in the 8th edition. So we're going to do a little spot the differences exercise, like those 2 pictures that are really close, so we figure them out. So what are some of the differences that you see between the 7th and the 8th edition?
The authors.
Absolutely. So the authors is one. And then so some of these differences are going to be on your container or under comparison worksheet here. So right, so the 7th edition of MLA says if you have 4 or more authors, use et al. But the new edition says no, if you have 3 or more authors, use et al. So that's going to shorten our citations a little bit. Okay, what else do we see besides the authors?
Volume, the number.
Exactly. So this is another big change, right? MLA is emphasizing, look, we want to make these citations logical. We want to make it, as far as possible, we want to make it clear to your reader what's going on. And so the way that in the 7th edition that they render the volume, issue, year, and page numbers, if you're not an expert on knowing what pieces those are, that is not going to make sense to you. That's a bunch of random numbers. And you can see that there's all sorts of punctuation in there too, periods and parentheses and colons. So they tried to simplify it a little bit more in the 8th edition. Now, for my volume and issue numbers, I'm actually going to proceed that with abbreviations for what those mean. You'll also notice that instead of all the periods and colons, we're actually separating those elements just with commas. So the punctuation is a little bit more simplified. The other thing you may notice here is that for journal articles now, if there is a month or a season to that journal issue, spring 2016, you're actually going to write that out too, the month or season. And finally, the last thing to notice at this part is that the page numbers now are preceded by PP dot to make it real clear that those are page numbers. If you only have a 1-page article, it's just going to be a single P dot. Maybe a sort of confusing thing though is that this does not apply to in-text citations. So in our in-text citations for MLA, we just do the author and the page number. We're not going to include the P in in-text citations, just in the longer citations. And then finally, so the last differences you're going to notice are going to be at the end of the citation. The 7th edition wanted us to include the medium of publication. Usually that was either web or print. We don't care about that now, so that's gone. You'll also notice that the 7th edition, that last thing in there is the date of access. What date did you get to that source the first time? The new edition of MLA says you could include that, but you don't have to. So that's really an optional element now. Instead, in its place, we've got the location of the second container. In this case, this is a journal article that was assigned a DOI, so that's why we have a DOI instead of a permalink there. Any questions about those two so far?
So you'll notice that, generally speaking, anytime we have a period, the next thing that follows after that will be capitalized, if it's not already. So that is kind of a rule of thumb in this new version, that you don't capitalize anything after a comma, and you capitalize things after a period.
All right, so here's another example.
Okay, so now we have anthology. MLA now calls a book collection. So if you look it up in the back of their new handbook, it will say anthology, you see book collection. So we have the author first, as always, so that is not changed. So usually the first thing we start out with is, what usually goes first in a citation. Well, if you have an author, that goes first. If you don't, then you start with the title. So what differences do you see in these examples for 7th and 8th edition?
The editor and edited and the punctuation.
Yeah, so we spell out edited by, translated by, directed by. Okay, anything else that you see different?
Well, there's a comma after ideas and then it's lowercase.
Okay. Comma after that, a period.
Don't
Period now.
include the city of the publication, which is a big one.
So we don't care about the city anymore. It's just the publisher and the date. And the thing is, the old MLA would ask you to just abbreviate it to like one word. Now we pretty much want, if it exists, more than one word. Like if it was Little Brown and Company, you would put Little, Brown. But anything like company, incorporated, limited, any sort of business type words, you get rid of. Other than that, you include it if it's part of the publisher's name.
And so for our last comparison, this is probably something that your students cite a lot. This is an example citation for a web page. And so some of the differences here, so we don't have an author on this web page, so this is an example where we start out with the title of the web page instead. But some of the differences you'll notice here are really at the end of the citation. So we start out, so here's the title of the web page. Here's the title of the website, Texas Parks and Wildlife. Now in the 7th edition, I would have to restate the website publisher, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Well, this new edition of MLA says, look, if your site title and the publisher, if they're so similar, right, or if they're the exact same thing, you don't need to repeat them like that. So that's why we see that just once here. And then finally, as we've mentioned, we don't include web, we don't include the date of access, but we do include the URL. And finally, one other difference here. You'll notice that in the 7th edition citation, I have the n.d. placeholder, which means what about that website? No date on it, right? Now MLA says, look, instead of using these placeholders, like sometimes you might see n.p. for your publisher, right? Instead of using these placeholders for information you don't have, just don't put anything there. Don't put that information. So if there's no date on the web page, you don't need to note that in any way now in the new edition. So some small changes there.
Okay, so basically at this point, I think most people I've talked to on campus have decided that they're going with the 8th, especially since a lot of the textbooks have MLA 8th information, especially if it's like an English type class. So most people are now going with the 8th. We still have the 7th information on our website. We have some handouts in the library that cover MLA 7, so it's kind of your call. But obviously let your class know which one you want, because we're going to probably ask students all the time which citation version are you using. And then you can also schedule a class, or more than one is fine too, to go over citation. Both of us have already done some classes for students in how to do citation based on a professor's asking us to come in and do that. We've talked about in-text, which has not really changed a lot. There are some additions to in-text that you can use as well. But most of the class has been talking about really the works cited, which has changed quite a bit. So if you have this URL, tinyurl.com/LSC live class, you can schedule us to come into your class, or you can come into the library lab and we can do a session or more for your student.
So before we go into this, I just kind of want to give you a quick example of an activity that we have done with students, and then we're going to take a look at some of the things on the webpage that we have updated for you. So I was in an English Literature 1 class a couple weeks ago, and the focus of the class was citation basics and LA edition, and so we were kind of doing some basic academic integrity and situations in which we cite and don't cite. Then we talked about in-text citations, and then we got to the works cited citations. So the first thing I did was ask the class, we did a quick think, pair, share about, okay, picture an article published in Time magazine. Besides that piece of information, how else could you tell somebody to find that article? What other pieces of information might help them? And so that sort of gets them primed to start thinking about those core elements, right? Oh, well, I can tell them what the author of the piece is. I can tell them what page number to find it on, what the volume number is, right? And then everybody in the class had a blank container worksheet, and we do have those on our website, so you could print and copy those from there. And so we sort of talked about kind of what each of those things mean and different punctuation. And then I asked them to get into a group of about 3 to 4. They all had that worksheet. And so what we did was we did an activity as a class to create a citation for like a documentary episode that they were watching online. And this was something they had to watch for their first 2 papers. So we wanted to make it really practical to make sure that, at least for this citation, everybody has this one correct. And so first we created the works cited list citation, and then we talked about how they would do the in-text citation. And that's actually going to show us one of those kind of small additions to in-text that Monica mentioned. So first everybody kind of went online. I had that link embedded in there, so they went right to their YouTube video. And they had a few minutes to work on this all together as a group, and then we sort of took them through each of those things. So we asked, okay, well, was there an author on your video? And they realized, no, there wasn't. And we sort of talked about the difference between videos that were uploaded by a news channel, as this case was, versus a video uploaded by an individual. So I said, if you have somebody that maybe created a makeup tutorial and they put that online, well, then we have an author. So then we moved on to the title of the source, and they pretty much figured out, okay, well, the title of the video as we see it is going to be the title of the source. But this let us talk about, kind of sentence capitalization, standardized capitalization, how you should sort of render titles with capitalization and quotation marks. And then this, the film that they were watching, it was actually an episode of a TV series. And so we talked about how sources and containers fit together, how episodes and programs fit together, and why one is in quotation marks versus italics. And then as we went through, we talked about who published the video, and students were right on that. In that case, it was actually the name of the YouTube channel that was the publisher. We talked about the dates, we talked about how to render dates in an LA format in this day, month, year. And then we moved on to our second container. So we had a really good discussion about containers. We realized that YouTube was our second container, right? The series was our first container, YouTube was our second. And then we also got to the location and how you would find that source online. And YouTube is actually similar to the New York Times example that we saw. They also have a sharing permalink. So rather than use the address from the browser bar, we talked about the difference between that and those permalinks. So at the end of this, after taking students through this, here was their finished citation for that video. And so hopefully this, nobody in that class will get points off now, and they're excited because we had all this. So this let us talk about the in-text citation for it. And we talked about, okay, well, if we don't have an author on this source, then in that case, we're gonna use a shortened version of the title in quotation marks in the parentheses. Although, a quick note, if you're actually doing if you're actually mentioning that right into the sentence, if you're mentioning the video title in the sentence, we do spell out the whole thing, so little differences there. But then one of the new additions to those in-text citations is that if you are citing something that would have a timestamp on it, right? So a YouTube video, or I guess you could even do maybe like a song, you know, where in the song it hits. We are actually going to notate that quote or that paraphrase we got. We're actually going to write out the timestamp. So this example quote that I used was 4 minutes and 28 seconds to 35 seconds in. So we talked about that. So that's an example of something that we could do in the classroom. In this case, it was a group activity, so there's group participation, and we did want to make it really practical and actually use a real world example that they would have to cite. So that's an example of something that we can do.
Okay, so we talked about some of the things that we can do for your students, and we have beefed up our online citation or research guide page for CyFair. Also, the system citation help page has been updated with MLA 8. So one thing that we did want to mention is we do have an interactive tutorial, it's drag and drop, where students can either work on it on their own, they get practice, and they actually get a short quiz of 10 questions, and then they either pass or fail that. It's a 70% passing grade if they get that many. So we had this for MLA 7, and we just made a new one, or updated one for MLA 8. So this is something that you can either do in class or have students work on, like I said, by themselves. So it's good practice because actually when the professor said, oh yeah, I did that myself, and I saw where I needed some more help and some more practice. So it's good for the professors actually to do it so they can run through it and see how it is and how it works. So we have examples coming up. Sorry, I know we go through some explanation of why we do cite, which is kind of interesting. Yes, it's the ethical thing to do, but it's also what the college expects you to do in getting credit to the original author of something. So we like to come at it from a proactive angle, why you should cite rather than what happens when you don't. So anyway, this is an easy one to get started with because it just has 4 elements. So I don't know if you want to try your hand at it. I think you can probably figure this one out. So if you can move these around, drag and drop, you can decide before you click submit whether you want to switch anything around, whether it's not in the correct order. If you click submit, it tells you whether you're right or not. So Jane got to pass that one well. But, and then it also gives you an in-text citation, which, as we said, is pretty much similar to what was true in the MLA 7, although there are a few changes or additions depending on what kind of source you have. So it gives you an example of what to put at the end of the sentence or at the beginning of the sentence. And this one is a journal article. So we have, in some cases, we have a DOI for this. I don't know if we mentioned that MLA prefers you to use a DOI or a digital object identifier because it's almost like a serial number for an article. So that is looking like the best. And second to that would be a permalink, and then the third would be an actual URL that you got on a browser bar at the top of the browser window. So this has multiple elements here and 2 containers. So it is a big test for Jane to figure this out because she is such a novice at this. No, I'm kidding. She's very good at it. So she's going to figure out where all these pieces go. And we did mark which belongs to which container and which location. So we made it a little bit easier. So, and then you can click submit and see if that's correct. So it's something that you can do. It's a little fun because you challenge yourself on that. And we do give you an example. And this is one where we start the citation with the author's name. So we have the author actually in the sentence, and then what would you put at the end of the sentence? What would you put? What is that? 235 refers to what? Do you think? Page number. Yeah. Okay. So that was correct. So you get the idea, but it's drag and drop, and then at the end there's like practice pages, and then, like I said, a quiz at the end where they can take that and they could print out the results and give it to you if you wanted them to.
real quick, I just wanted to bring up our SciFair research guides that is also linked on that slide, just so you can see what's up there. So we do still have all the 7th edition sources up there, along with the 8th. And some of the things that we have as handouts are linked up here. So this is the MLA 7th and 8th editions comparison chart. This is, I think, that very first link up there, right? The works cited and in text. We just saw the interactive practice and that MLA blank worksheet 8th edition. That's what we used in that class, that English 1301 class I mentioned. And so you can feel free to reproduce that if you wanted your students to practice right there in class. Using the worksheet is not strictly necessary to make the citation, but it helps for beginners, I think, to practice, kind of writing it out like that. And I think the focus on the core elements is actually a really great opportunity for us as far as teaching, because you can almost teach the documentation and evaluation at the same time. Because if we teach students questions to ask about evaluating sources, well, who wrote this source? When did they write it? Where did it get published? Where did I find it? Those are the same questions. The answers to those questions are going to help them fill out the container worksheet too. So teaching them to ask those kind of critical questions about the sources they use, I think will help them both select their sources and help them out in the documentation. So that's sort of an exciting opportunity, I think, for teaching that too.
Okay, I think this is dealing with other sources.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I was looking at Purdue Out today again, and they have updated their page since the summer, and they're a little confusing because in some of their basic examples, they use some of the optional elements. We touched on that a little bit. There's like, I think, at least three optional elements, which includes one of them is like the date of access, date of original publication, information like that. So Purdue Out can be a little confusing in some of their examples for MLA 8. The MLA Style Center is also not without fault. Sorry, I'm not trying to find fault, but they have some examples that are helpful, but some leave still some things up in the air as far as how to cite some examples. They are taking questions, though, which I have sent them quite a number of questions to answer online. So they give some examples of things that aren't covered in the book. And so you might want to check. I do go and check there myself. They have sample papers as well. They have sample container core element worksheets filled out. So it's another source of information. And EasyBib is one of those citation creators, which I've gotten questions in classes. Can I just use a citation creator? What's the point of doing all these worksheets and everything? I could just go online. Well, a lot of those citation creators have not been updated to MLA 8. And EasyBib is one of them that sort of has. It does still ask you things like the place of publication, which I don't even know why it's asking that, but it's the best thing that's around that covers MLA 8, but you do need to be careful that you do sort of check what are the pieces I need, what is it that I don't need, before you fill out the whole form that they list online. So anything that you use is not foolproof. You still have to double check it before you turn in your assignment. It's better than nothing. It's good to have something to go with as a start for creating your citation.
And sadly, my favorite citation generator is NightCite, and they have not updated the 8th edition yet. There's a little note on the bottom of their website that says, we know about it, we're just not there yet. So with that, can we answer any questions or clear up any confusion about this new edition? Does it seem easy to kind of wrap your mind around?